She walked into a room where prejudice sat at the head of the table, and arrogance got its coffee served first. They thought she was just on the wrong floor, an applicant not even worth remembering by name. But within minutes, the very people who judged her would be unmasked, right there in the fortress they thought was untouchable. And that woman didn't need to raise her voice to bring an entire system to its knees. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We'd love to know. And if you're into stories of justice, quiet strength, and the kind of takedowns that don't need a shout, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story we share every day. Now, let's step behind the glass walls of the 40th floor at Monroe Systems and see what really happened beneath the dull gray sky of a March morning in Seattle. The wind carried the scent of rain through every crevice of the city. On the 40th floor of Monroe Systems, the headquarters of one of the most powerful tech conglomerates in America, there was a stillness like a lake before a storm. The glass-walled conference room remained sealed, cold light pouring through reinforced windows overlooking Puget Sound, where the sky never stopped threatening rain. Elisa Monroe, 32, stepped into the room with a neatly prepared résumé and a modest outfit. No designer bags, no expensive watch, no makeup to soften the angles of her face. Just worn-out flats, a simple ponytail, and a thin folder in her hand, held close as if it were only shield against the cold scrutiny already coming from the far end of the table. She was here to interview for the position of Director of System Solutions, a strategic role central to Monroe Systems' upcoming expansion into applied AI, a position not meant for amateurs, much less for someone judged solely by appearances. But in this room, competence had never been allowed to speak before prejudice passed its sentence. The moment Elisa entered, Veronica Hale, head of human resources, infamous for her icy demeanor and sharper tongue, raised an eyebrow and muttered audibly, "She looks like she just walked out of the lost and found closet." A ripple of quiet laughter moved down the conference table. Carter Langston, 29, son of one of Monroe Systems' founding shareholders, wasn't just a competing candidate for the role. He was also on the HR Council's priority succession list. It was less a competition than a coronation. Carter had never passed through a single formal round of recruitment, yet always found himself in key meetings, as if legacy were a substitute for merit. He tilted his head, voice dripping with disdain. "Are we holding interviews or running a charity drive?" Dean Whitmore, Chief Strategy Officer, long criticized for concluding before asking questions, leaned back in his chair and twirled his pen with visible boredom. "I think we fulfilled our diversity quota for a year." Rachel Tran, head of analytics, known for her speech on merit over image, but never hiring anyone without an Ivy League diploma, flicked through her tablet's briefing, her lips curling into a smirk. Logan Pierce, Deputy Executive Officer, sat silently at the far end of the table, arms crossed. His eyes scanned Elisa, not as if evaluating skills, but as if questioning whether she even belonged in the room. No one objected. No one corrected. Because this wasn't the first time, and it certainly wasn't abnormal. On the 40th floor of Monroe Systems, mockery had a blueprint, and prejudice had its own seat at the table. Elisa remained still. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. Every mocking word landed on her like cold water, sharp, stinging, but unable to shake her. She had endured worse. 10 years ago, she had spent the night curled up on a bench in Salt Lake City's train station, clutching an old hard drive in her backpack and a dream most people found laughable. She placed a folder in front of Veronica, plain white paper, basic font, no logo, no glossy cover, just her name and a string of experiences laid out like footprints. "I'm here because I believe I can solve a problem you haven't even thought to name yet." Dean scoffed. "With your sociology degree? This is Seattle, not a book club." Elisa nodded, her voice low and steady. "Exactly. That's why I can see what you overlook. Systems don't just live on servers. They live between people." No one took notes. No one asked a follow-up question. They had closed the door to understanding the moment she walked in. But Elisa hadn't come to be accepted. She had come to reveal the true face of this room. And today's interview was just a prologue to a storm gathering behind these glass walls. Under the harsh white light and the glass walls that mirrored every motion, Elisa Monroe stood upright, as if the storm around her were nothing more than a late autumn breeze. But the words hurled her way were anything but gentle. They struck with the force of jagged stones, cast by people who believed they had the right to sneer. Carter Langston leaned his elbow on the table, tilting toward her, voice thick with condescension. With a sociology degree? What's your plan? Lead a mindfulness circle for the dev team. Laughter rippled through the room. Rachel Tran, who prided herself on 2 master's degrees in data science, didn't need to say much. She simply shrugged, then turned to whisper to Logan Pierce, loud enough for Elisa to hear. She looks more like someone applying for a front desk job than a strategic lead. Logan, usually reserved, didn't bother hiding the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He crossed his arms, looked Elisa up and down like assessing a defective item. Pretty sure she's on the wrong floor. Customer support is downstairs. Elisa said nothing. She only tightened her grip on the folder's edge, her gaze holding firm, not angry, just steady, not because it didn't hurt, but because she was far too used to this brand of harm. Suddenly, Dean Whitmore stood up, grabbed a stack of logic puzzles from the corner of the table, and walked over to her. He placed it down in front of her. We've decided to test you with a logic assessment. You have 5 minutes. No laptop, no calculator, just a pen in your brain. The room fell silent, a disguise trap, and they thought she would stumble. Elisa nodded. I'll need a blank sheet of paper. Veronica Hale, who hadn't lifted her eyes from her phone the entire time, didn't bother looking up. She tossed a folded sheet toward Elisa. It landed on the table with a crumpled edge, like a token from a world where respect had long been traded away. Elisa sat. Her pen moved. No hesitation. No pause. Just lines, diagrams, logical symbols, data models, variables, algorithms. Things they assumed she couldn't possibly comprehend. The kind of work she had written thousands of hours for. Behind the projects they used without ever knowing the name of the person who built them. Carter Langston yawned. Is she writing a farewell letter? Veronica smirked. If she finishes early, I'll treat her to lunch. If she pays. Laughter. Again. But Elisa didn't look up. She finished, folded the paper neatly, and slid it toward Dean. Dean took it, glanced briefly, and then tore it in half. The sound ripped through the room like a whip against tile. Don't need to read it. Just another heap of theoretical garbage. He tossed the torn paper into a nearby trash bin. Elisa didn't react. She simply stood up, wiped a stray ink mark from her hand with her sleeve. Her eyes didn't well with tears. But somewhere beneath her ribcage, a chill crawled down her spine. Not from humiliation, but from the realization that these people, perhaps, had never possessed humanity to begin with. The shredded test fluttered onto the carpet like a broken kite. One half showed an answer key, embedded logic structures, conditional frameworks, all that she had just written, now scattered like fragments of discarded dignity. Dean Whitmore said nothing more. He just sneered, picked up one of the torn pieces, and dropped it into his empty coffee cup, like it was a used napkin. Carter Langston stood, stretching like he'd just endured a dull meeting. Well, at least she didn't scream. Points for emotional stability. Veronica Hale crossed her legs, flipped her hair, and spoke with the kind of voice that poured ice into your chest. I've seen robots react more convincingly. Elisa Monroe looked at them, not with fury, but with something else, something sharp enough to make Veronica pause, if only for a beat, in the middle of her sneer. I'm not surprised you dismissed that test, Elisa said, her voice still as calm as when she first walked in, because if you had the capacity to understand it, you wouldn't need these little games to feel superior. The room fell into absolute silence. The conference room was suspended in a stunned stillness after Elisa's words. But it didn't last. Carter Langston shot to his feet, eyes blazing. Who do you think you are, talking like that in here? Elisa turned to him, calm and steady. I don't think I'm anyone special, but I do know I'm not the kind of person who belittles others to prove I'm qualified. Veronica Hale let out a sharp scoff, reached under the table for a chilled water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and without warning, poured it straight over Elisa's head. Ice-cold water drenched her blouse and skirt, and the room erupted into laughter. Not to be outdone, Dean Whitmore grabbed a nearby trash bin and dumped its contents, crumpled paper and a used coffee cup, over Elisa's head. She stood still, water and garbage dripping from her hair and shoulders, but her gaze never faltered. Carter Langston roared, "Security, get her out of here, now!" 2 security guards rushed in, each seizing one of Elisa's arms, ready to drag her out of the room. She didn't resist. She simply lifted her chin, eyes fixed forward. Then, an unexpected interruption. The glass door behind him slid open, and a voice rang out, cold, clipped, and unmistakably authoritative. I was walking past and couldn't help but hear. Did the candidate evaluation turn into a circus performance? The room froze. Everyone recognized that voice. Veronica, Dean, Logan, and Carter all shot up from their seats simultaneously. Elisa turned and her eyes met his. Jackson Monroe, wearing a dark gray overcoat, road dust still clinging to the hem. His angular face showed no outright anger, but what he carried was more terrifying, an unsettling calm laced with disappointment. "Let go of Ms. Elisa. Now," he said to the guards, his tone steel cold. "What exactly do you think you're doing in here?" Jackson's gaze swept across the room, landing on each face in turn. "I assigned this team one task, to select a director of system solutions for our strategic AI expansion initiative at Monroe Systems." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Each word landed like a weight. But instead of evaluating competence, you chose to dismantle a person. And worst of all, Jackson stepped aside, leaving the center of the room for Elisa. "You just humiliated my wife, the co-founder of Monroe Systems." Still with us? That twist hit hard, didn't it? If you're as shocked as we are, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone in this wild ride. And hey, if you've got thoughts, reactions, or just need to process this dramatic bombshell, leave a comment below. We're all ears. A blow delivered without a single fist. Carter blurted out, "Co-founder?" Elisa didn't respond. She simply unfolded the worn folder she had carried with her, pulling out a document, a patent. The title read clearly, "Inventors, Jackson Monroe, Elisa Monroe, dated March 12, 2012. The first blueprint of the language processing system Monroe Systems built its empire on." Veronica went pale. Dean leaned back as if gravity had shifted. Carter, who had lounged smugly minutes earlier, now sat bolt upright, his arrogance visibly unraveling. Jackson continued, his voice as steady as ever. "She wrote the first line of code in the system you all use every day. While some of you were still learning how to format a resume, she was writing history." No one dared interrupt. "Tomorrow," he said, voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "we will hold a formal review hearing. If you intend to keep your role at this company, be ready to prove you're ethically fit to represent the Monroe Systems name." His eyes swept the room. "If you're not, don't show up." Silence fell like winter across the glass and steel boardroom. No more laughter, just a biting stillness, and the unmistakable chill of reckoning. Elisa still hadn't spoken, but she didn't need to. Her silence had become the final verdict. The next day, back in the 40th floor boardroom, everyone sat upright, tense. Jackson gave a nod to the AV technician in the control room. A click, the massive LED wall flickered on. A soft static hum, the opening act to a full, unedited broadcast of everything that happened during that now infamous interview. Crystal clear audio, unfiltered footage, every breath audible. Then the voices began to echo, now weaponized by truth. "She looks like she raided the lost and found." Veronica's dry, disdainful tone filled the room. "Are we interviewing or handing out charity?" Carter's smug laughter followed. "Mail rooms hiring." Dean had sneered as Elisa stood silently holding her resume. Around the table, shame pressed down like a heavy fog. Dean stared into the table. Carter avoided everyone's gaze, eyes flickering to the exit like he was hoping to disappear. But the screen wasn't done. The video kept playing. The screen froze on the moment of highest disgrace. Dean ripping Elisa's completed logic test in half. Paper fluttering to the floor like pieces of dignity, while Rachel's voice cut through in mocking contempt. "At best, she's coffee girl material. No one laughed now. Jackson stood squarely in the center of the room. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word you spoke reflected a culture. Not Monroe Systems' culture, your own. He turned to the screen again. The most damning footage yet. Veronica dousing Elisa in water, and Dean dumping a full trash can of shredded paper over her. The room watched in paralyzed silence, each frame like a mirror reflecting their own guilt. I didn't think she was... Veronica started to stammer. Jackson's eyes cut to her, no louder than before, but sharper than any shout. You didn't think. That's the problem. He turned to Dean. You thought you were being funny, but you insulted the woman who built the very architecture of this company's AI division. And then to Carter. You called her a joke. So go explain to the board how our programming department exists today because of the code written by a joke. Rachel sprang up. I just went along with it. I wasn't leading it. Jackson's voice didn't waver. His eyes pinned her like a spotlight. Staying silent in the face of injustice doesn't make you innocent. It makes you a coward. The air in the room had become something solid. No one moved, not even a breathe, too loud. Elisa stood beside her husband, silent, arms crossed, eyes level. She hadn't spoken since entering the room, but now her silence echoed louder than any voice. She hadn't needed to raise her voice to be heard, because truth, when revealed fully, speaks for itself. The screen went dark. The lights overhead seemed colder somehow, more honest. Jackson turned, his tone no longer cutting, but conclusive. Every action leaves a mark. And today, you'll have to live with yours. He took one breath, then spoke the first of many consequences. Veronica Hale, head of human resources, he said, his voice firm and controlled. Your actions violated the core ethical and cultural values of this company. You are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Veronica's face turned ashen. She said nothing. Lips pressed so tightly together they seemed stitched shut. Dean Whitmore, Director of Strategic Planning, Jackson continued without pause. Your behavior was not only unprofessional, but degrading to a colleague. You are also terminated, effective immediately. Dean half rose from his chair, as if to protest, but the look in Jackson's eyes pushed him back into it like gravity. Carter Langston, Jackson said firmly, you came here as a candidate for the Director of System Solutions, but your arrogance and lack of respect have no place in this organization. You are terminated effective immediately. Carter, once the untouchable heir whose mockery felt like a privilege, lowered his head. No defiance, no excuses, just silence. The kind that comes when a man realizes his last name can no longer protect him. Rachel Tran, head of analytics, Jackson continued, your silence and complicity were a betrayal of our core values. You are terminated effective immediately. Rachel's eyes welled up, a tear slipping down her cheek, but she said nothing. The room had no room left for pleas. Logan Pierce, Deputy COO, Jackson finished. Your apathy and abdication of responsibility contributed directly to this. You are terminated immediately. Logan stood up without protest, gathered his things, and quietly walked out. Just then, the conference room doors opened. A team of security personnel entered without a word. They moved with purpose, collecting key cards, escorting each dismissed executive out one by one. The room remained heavy with silence, but this silence had changed. It wasn't discomfort. It was reckoning. When the last of the offenders had left, Jackson turned to face the remaining board members and stakeholders. We will not tolerate disrespect or discrimination in this company, he said. Monroe Systems will immediately launch a comprehensive audit of our corporate culture and retrain all personnel on professional ethics and human decency. Only now did Elisa step forward. Her voice was calm but unwavering. I don't need an apology. I need action. Let's make this a lesson, not just for today, but for who we choose to be tomorrow. No one responded, but this silence wasn't avoidance. It was assent, and outside that room, the aftershocks had already begun. Just hours after the Monroe Systems boardroom shook with consequence, a quiet digital quake rippled through Silicon Valley. Not from a tech product, not from an IPO, but from a leaked video. A young engineer, present as a note-taker during the meeting, had discreetly captured a minute-long clip. Elisa Monroe, soaked, disheveled, but composed, standing beside Jackson Monroe, the reclusive founder many thought had retired long ago. The caption read, "You won't believe the woman they called a failure helped build the tech you're using right now." Within 12 hours, the video hit Reddit's front page, then Twitter, then LinkedIn, and soon TechCrunch, Wired, Business Insider, and even CNN Tech lit up with headlines like, "When silence becomes the loudest rebuttal." Monroe's systems just gave corporate arrogance a masterclass in consequences. She wrote the algorithm you're building your career on, then walked into her own interview. What had started as a cruel room had become a mirror, not just of Monroe systems, but for an industry where talent too often went unnoticed unless it fit a polished mold. A former Monroe Systems employee even wrote a blog post revealing that the resource forecasting system Elisa had developed helped the company avoid a catastrophic server crash during their spring marketing campaign, something no one on the current executive board ever knew. But the issue wasn't just Elisa's story anymore. Hashtags like hashtag bias in tech, hashtag silent founders, and hashtag respect before Zoom began flooding social media. Programmers, researchers, and senior professionals from rival firms began sharing their own stories. How their colleagues have been underestimated due to appearances, origins, or unfamiliar names. On a widely followed podcast about equity in tech, the host commented, "Elisa Monroe didn't have to raise her voice to prove anything. She simply stood there, and the entire system crumbled under the weight of its own disdain." At Monroe Systems headquarters, the executive board swiftly issued an internal memorandum, signed personally by Jackson Monroe, pledging to restructure the company's entire hiring and evaluation processes. An independent ethics and equity council was formed, and for the first time in the company's history, employees were invited to anonymously contribute to an internal investigation. But the ripples didn't stop at one company. CEOs at major tech firms like HelixNet, Quantum9, and Novatrack were all compelled to address how their organizations treated talent that didn't fit the traditional mold. Elisa gave no interviews. She didn't appear on talk shows, but photographs of her wiping water from her cheek, eyes steady, shoulders unbowed, became iconic, a symbol not of victimhood, but of resilience. And the industry understood. Unless it changed, more Elisas would walk into boardrooms, each one bringing a storm stronger than the last. 6 months later, Elisa Monroe stepped onto the main stage at the Future Ethics and AI conference in Seattle. The spotlight glinted off her charcoal blazer. Simple, sharp, commanding. No longer the woman in soaked blouse and worn flats. She now stood as a symbol of recovery through quiet power and enduring value. The auditorium was packed. Over 1,200 attendees from tech giants, research institutes, and major investment firms sat in rapt attention. When her name was announced, the applause lasted nearly 2 minutes. Not out of pity, but out of profound respect. Elisa took the stage without notes. No slides, no teleprompter. She opened with a quiet line. "I have nothing to present today, except what you all failed to see 6 months ago." The room held its breath. "I'm not here to retell my story. I'm here to say this. Judging someone by their shoes, their voice, or the way they tie their hair isn't a hiring decision. It's a systemic flaw, and that system is us." Elisa's speech didn't call out individuals, but each sentence rang like a bell inside an industry long overdue for reflection. She spoke about redefining what qualified looks like, about building workplace culture on dignity, not resume bullet points, about seeing people for what they are, not what they appear to be. Her words became the most quoted segment of that fall's conference season, shared in memos, recirculated on Slack channels, and printed on the walls of HR departments from Palo Alto to Berlin. Because she hadn't just delivered a keynote, she'd changed the way an entire industry listens. What happened to those who once mocked Elisa? Veronica Hale, once the HR director, now runs a personal blog with 312 followers, writing about the costly lessons of arrogance. Dean Whitmore, reduced to a part-time contributor at a minor recruitment platform. Carter Langston, cut off from all family investment chains, LinkedIn profile deactivated. Rachel Tran, No company has hired her since the viral video. Logan Pierce issued a public apology on a low-level podcast, but no one paid attention. They once called Elisa a joke in the boardroom. Now, they are the living answer to the question, what happens when you misjudge someone who's truly brilliant? Elisa never retaliated. Her success was her response. That morning in Seattle, there was no applause, no grand stage. But within Monroe's system's internal network, a single image quietly spread. A still frame from that now infamous video. Elisa Monroe, soaked with water, coffee, and garbage, silently kneeling to pick up torn pages from the floor. No protests, no tears, just her eyes, steady, calm, and unshaken. Beneath the image was a caption, written by a new intern whose name no one really knew. I didn't know who she was back then, but I learned the most important thing here. Strength doesn't have to be loud, and justice sometimes begins with not falling down. Elisa didn't teach that lesson through a TED Talk. She didn't weaponize the media. She simply moved forward with quiet resolve, leaving behind those who once believed that cheap shoes and a plain résumé meant failure. Monroe's systems, in the wake of the storm, transformed, not through speeches, but through hundreds of internal meetings, training overhauls, and a new hiring policy now boldly stated in every recruitment email. Respect is the first requirement. Talent knows no appearance. In another city, during a panel in Chicago, someone asked Elisa how she faced prejudice with strength without becoming bitter. She smiled and replied, "Sometimes the only thing you need to do is stand still, because when you don't look down, they have no choice but to look up." The story of Elisa Monroe didn't explode like a scandal. It sank in deep into the conscience of an industry and a generation, because real justice doesn't always arrive with drums and declarations. Sometimes it comes in a form of dignity held firm, even when the world tries its hardest to strip away.